What would you do if saving a stranger meant putting your own life in danger? That was the question Cordelia Thompson never thought she'd face, not out there on the silent, sunburned plains of Texas. The summer of 1878 had a way of turning ordinary days into battles for survival. Cordelia lived alone on 50 acres, near the slow, bending Brazos River. A year had passed since the fever took her husband Thomas, leaving behind a small sod house, a dozen stubborn longhorn cattle, and a loneliness she carried like a second skin. At 28, her hands were hardened by work, her face tanned by a sun that did not care how tired she was, and her eyes always scanned the horizon in caution. She knew every sound, every shadow, and every danger that hid in the wild stretches around her home. That Tuesday morning began like any other. Dawn rose in streaks of pink and orange across the grasslands, lighting up the buffalo grass with a soft glow. Cordelia, whom folks called Cora, had been up since first light, tending her chores. But one of her cattle had gone missing the day before, a wandering brindle steer known for slipping through fences. So she saddled her buckskin mare Daisy, holstered Thomas's old Colt Patterson, and set out to search. The heat grew heavier with every passing mile. The plains shimmered as if trembling under an invisible fire. The only sounds were Daisy's slow hooves in the creak of worn leather. Cora wiped sweat from her brow and scanned the rocky outcrops ahead where a steer might hide from the sun. She heard the sound before she saw the sight. A low, strangled groan carried across a shallow, brush-filled arroyo. Daisy stopped, ears flicking nervously. Cora slid off the saddle, her hand instinctively reaching for the gun at her side. She tied Daisy to a mesquite branch and stepped forward through the tangle of thorny brush. What she found turned her blood cold. It wasn't her cattle, it was a man, a Comanche warrior. He lay half-hidden under acacia bushes, sweat shining on his bare chest, dirt streaked across his skin. One side of his long black hair was matted with blood, but it was his right leg that froze her where she stood. A massive bear trap, the kind used by cruel ranchers who treated wild land like a battleground, clamped around his leg just below the knee. The steel teeth had sunk deep into his flesh. Blood soaked the dirt beneath him. His hands were torn raw. He had fought hard to free himself. He didn't cry out. He didn't beg. He only stared at her with dark, burning eyes that held both agony and ferocious pride. His body was tight with instinct, like a wounded wolf ready to attack if she came too close. Fear surged through Cora. She had heard stories, terrible stories, of lone settlers who crossed paths with wounded warriors. She knew the danger. She knew she should turn around, get back on Daisy, and ride straight home. This was not her fight. The trap wasn't hers. It belonged to men like Bartholomew Higgins, her cruel northern neighbor, who believed the only good Comanche was a dead one. Her mind told her to leave. But she didn't, because she saw something in the warrior's eyes that struck her deeper than fear. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't rage. It was acceptance. He believed he was going to die there. He even began to chant under his breath, soft, steady, heartbreaking. Cora's breath hitched. She thought of Thomas, and how helpless she'd felt watching him fade. She looked at the trap again, at the swollen flesh, at the blood-soaked dirt. Gangrene would set in soon. Death would follow. "Damn it," she whispered under her breath. Her fear stayed, sharp and cold, but another force rose to match it. A stubborn compassion she didn't know she still had. She raised her empty hands slowly, showing she meant no harm. "I want to help," she murmured. The warrior's chant stopped. His eyes narrowed, watching her with wary understanding. Cora backed away, walked to her saddlebag, and grabbed two things, a small flask of whiskey and a heavy iron pry bar she used for fence posts. Her hands trembled as she returned. She knelt a cautious distance away and held out the flask. He stared for a long moment before taking it with a bloody hand. He drank deep, pain twisting his face. She pointed to the trap, then to herself. He gave a tiny nod. She set the pry bar between the jaws and heaved. The trap did not budge. She gritted her teeth and tried again. Still nothing. In frustration, she nearly cried, until the warrior, breath shaking, pointed to one of the springs. He motioned downward. "You want me to hit the spring?" she said softly. Another small nod. She moved the bar, planted her feet, and threw her weight into it. With a crack, the first spring snapped open. The warrior hissed in agony, gripping the dirt. "One more," she panted. She repeated the process. Another crack. The jaws loosened fully and dropped open. He was free. But his leg was mangled. Blood poured from the wounds. He wouldn't survive an hour in the open, and she knew it. He looked at her then, not with suspicion, but with something deeper. Respect, or perhaps wonder. He pointed to himself. "Tohopka," he said. She swallowed and pointed to her own chest. "Cora." He nodded once, solid and sure. Then his eyes drifted to his ruined leg. The silent question followed. What now? Bringing him home was madness. Leaving him meant death. But Cora already knew the answer. She steadied herself, helped him to daisy, and guided him onto the saddle. It took everything she had. He leaned forward, barely conscious. Cora took the reins. She led him carefully out of the arroyo, her heart thundering. Something inside her whispered that by freeing that trap, she had sprung a different one that might swallow her whole. She just didn't know how soon the danger would arrive. Cora barely slept that night. She moved between the house and the barn like a ghost, her senses stretched tight. Every creak of wind, every flutter of the tall grass, every distant howl made her grip the handle of Thomas's revolver a little tighter. She had taken a huge risk bringing Tohopka home, and now the weight of that choice pressed down on her like the Texas heat. By dawn, the warrior's fever had worsened. He lay on a bed of clean hay, his breath shallow, his skin hot enough to burn. The wound on his leg pulsed with angry red swelling. Cora cleaned it again, fighting nausea at the sight, fearing infection was already setting in. She talked to him in a soft voice, even though he was drifting in and out of consciousness. She told him to hold on, told him she was trying, told him he wasn't alone, but she was terrified. By mid-morning, trouble arrived. 2 riders came down the North Trail, Bartholomew Higgins and his ragged, smirking ranch hand Jeb. Cora saw them before they saw her. She stepped out onto her porch, spine straight, rifle inside the house within reach. Higgins was a large man with a cruel pink face and small, calculating eyes. He smiled at her, though it was the kind of smile you'd expect from a wolf before it took a bite. "Afternoon, Mrs. Thompson," he said. "You out riding yesterday?" Cora didn't move. "I was." "Strange thing," he went on. "Found one of my traps sprung. Big one, meant for a bear. Found blood too, a lot of it. Found tracks, moccasin prints, and a woman's boot." Her stomach tightened, but she kept her face cold. "I don't know anything about your traps," she said. Higgins leaned forward in his saddle. "This isn't a place for a woman alone. Things can get dangerous fast. Wells can go bad. Houses can burn." His smile thinned. "But I made you a fair offer. $500 for this land still stands." "The property is not for sale," Cora said. The false grin vanished from Higgins's face. Anger twisted it into something ugly. "You'll regret that." He turned his horse sharply. "Don't come crying when something happens you can't handle." They galloped away, leaving dust and dread behind. Cora walked straight to the barn. Tohopka was awake, his dark eyes sharp despite the fever. He had heard everything. "He will return," Tohopka rasped. "I know," Cora said. The next morning brought a new horror. When she lowered her bucket into the well, the water came up cloudy and foul-smelling. On the second pull, a dead prairie dog floated to the surface, its body swollen and rotting. Cora staggered back, gagging. Her well, her lifeline, was poisoned. Higgins had declared war. Inside the barn, Tohopka's fever deepened. He twitched and muttered in his own language. His wound seeped. Cora washed it with the last of her clean water, the smell of infection growing sharper. Her body was exhausted, but her mind raced. She couldn't ride for help. The sheriff was too far. Her nearest neighbor feared Higgins and wouldn't get involved. The nearest town was a day's ride away, and even if she made it that far, she wouldn't leave Tohopka. He would not survive a single day without care. Thursday would be the third day, and she knew Higgins would be back, with more than threats. That night, sitting on the edge of her porch, she felt a hopelessness she had never known. Behind her, Tohopka breathed in shallow gasps. In the distance, coyotes howled. The plains felt wider and emptier than ever before. What she didn't know was that many miles west, in the broken lands beyond the plains, another fire burned. Tohopka's disappearance had shaken his people. By the second day, searchers found the place where he'd fought the trap. They also found the tracks, the woman's tracks, that led east. That night, the non-Comanche gathered around their council fire. Warriors argued, their voices thick with fury. Many believed the woman was bait for an ambush, that she had captured Tohopka. Their anger pushed for a raid. One warrior, Makwa, demanded they burn the woman's home to the ground. But Chief Nuna raised his hand and silenced them all. No decision, he said, until the truth is clear. As if summoned by the chief's calm command, a figure staggered into the circle, Tohopka himself. Dirty, wounded, barely standing, he somehow had traveled back to warn them. He told them everything. How the woman had freed him, how she had tended his wounds, how she had risked her life, how another settler, Higgins, now threatened her, how her well was poisoned, how she sat alone, waiting to die. "She saved my life," Tohopka said. "Not for reward, not from fear, from honor." Makwa scoffed, calling him fever-blinded, but Tohopka stepped toward him, eyes blazing. "Would you let a woman who saved your life be killed by a coward?" he demanded. "Is our honor so thin?" Silence fell. Chief Nuna rose slowly. The firelight flickered across his lined face. "This Higgins," he said, "fights like a rat, poisons water, threatens women. Such men are enemies to all people." He looked west. "We ride, not to burn, not to raid. We ride for honor." Tohopka bowed his head, and so the Comanche war party prepared. Back at the homestead, dawn of the third day broke hot and heavy. Cora found the barn empty. Tohopka was gone. He had left signs of struggle, dragging footprints, a broken stick he'd used as a crutch. The realization struck her hard. He didn't leave because he was healed. He left to protect her, but it didn't matter now. Higgins would come regardless. Cora pushed down her fear and prepared her home for a siege. She dragged a table against the door, barred the window with iron, loaded Thomas's Sharps rifle and laid out cartridges. By afternoon, smoke curled into the sky. Her barn was burning, her milk cow, her chickens, her hay, her winter stores. Gone. Then 3 riders appeared. Higgins, Jeb, and a scar-faced hired gun. They carried rifles and torches. They stopped just out of pistol range. "Give up the land," Higgins shouted. "Go!" Cora yelled back. That was all it took. Jeb and the scar-faced man dismounted, torches raised, creeping toward the house. Cora rested her Sharps on the windowsill, heart hammering. She took aim at Jeb. The shot cracked, echoing across the plains. Jeb screamed and fell back, holding his bleeding shoulder. Gunfire exploded in return. Bullets slammed into her house. Wood splintered. The air filled with smoke and terror. She fumbled her reload. The scar-faced man was already near the wall, ready to set it ablaze. This was the end. Her hands trembled. Her breath shook. Then a sound cut through the heat like a knife, a piercing cry, high and sharp, then another, then 20 more. A Comanche war cry tearing through the afternoon. Cora froze. Higgins froze. The men turned toward the west, and there they came, Comanche riders flooding over the rising hills, painted for battle, moving like a river of fire and wind. At their head rode Chief Nuna. Beside him, with his wounded leg tied to the saddle, rode Tohopka. The men who had come to kill her went white as bone. The earth shook with pounding hooves, and for the first time since Thomas died, Cora felt something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. The earth trembled beneath the force of the charging riders. Dust rose behind them like a rolling storm, sunlight flashing off polished lance tips and painted shields. Never in her life had Cora seen anything so fierce or so commanding as the non-Comanche war party sweeping across her land. But they were not coming for her. They were coming for the men who had tried to kill her. Higgins's hired hand Jeb dropped his torch and scrambled backward, clutching his injured arm. The scar-faced man tried to mount his horse, but the animal panicked at the thunder of hooves and reared, throwing him to the dirt. Higgins himself stepped back in disbelief, his face pale and twisted with rage. "What in God's name?" he sputtered, but he didn't have time to finish. The Comanche split into two swift lines, sweeping around him with breathtaking precision. They moved like wind across water, fluid, silent, deadly. Arrows struck the dirt at Higgins's feet. Lances flashed past the scar-faced man's shoulders. Their horses circled tighter, closing the noose. Tohopka led the inside ring of riders. His leg was bound tightly to the saddle, but his back was straight, his posture steady. Even injured, he was a force of strength. He guided his horse toward the scar-faced man and knocked him to the ground with a single, devastating strike using the butt of a spear. Jeb dropped to his knees, hands raised, squealing, I'm done, quote. His fear made him small. Higgins, however, tried to shoot. He aimed at the riders, finger trembling on the trigger, but before he could fire, Chief Nuna brought his horse right in front of him. Nuna did nothing more than look down at the rancher. The power in that look sent a ripple of silence through the air. Higgins' hand shook. The pistol dropped from his fingers. The coward was exposed. Two warriors dismounted and bound him with his own rope. Jeb and the scar-faced man were tied just as quickly. The three men who had come to burn Cora's home now knelt in the dirt, weapons gone, pride shattered. Inside her house, Cora lowered her rifle with trembling hands. The sound of hoofbeats slowed as the Comanche surrounded the homestead. The burning barn crackled behind her, smoke drifting into the open sky. The sudden silence was almost overwhelming, broken only by the faint whimpering of the ranchers. Cora stepped out onto her porch carefully. She stood tall, though her legs felt weak. Her eyes found Tohopka first. He watched her with steady, quiet strength, breathing hard but alert. He nudged his horse forward a few steps. Chief Nuna rode with him. Nuna studied her with the calm gaze of a man who saw deeper than words. Tohopka translated as the chief spoke. The chief says, the man who poisons water is a danger to all people. Cora nodded, her throat tight. He would have killed me. Tohopka listened to her words, then repeated them to Nuna. The chief's eyes darkened at the mention of the poisoned well. He says, Tohopka translated, your water is your own, your land is your own, and this man will trouble you no more. Quote, Cora didn't ask what would happen to Higgins or the others. She didn't need to. Justice had already found them. Makwa, the warrior who had opposed helping her, was the one who secured Higgins's knot. He looked at Cora, not with suspicion now, but with a grudging respect that came from seeing someone stand their ground in the face of impossible odds. The war party began preparing to leave, pulling the prisoners with them. But Tohopka remained behind for a moment. He eased his horse closer to her porch, wincing as the movement jostled his injured leg. You fought, he said quietly. You did not run. I didn't have a choice, she said. You had many choices, he said. You chose courage. She swallowed hard. You came back for me. To repay honor, he said, and because no one should die alone on open land. There was a long, quiet moment between them. Wind brushed through the tall grass. Smoke drifted in slow curls from the ruined barn. Somewhere in the distance a hawk cried. Tohopka reached into the pouch tied to his saddle. He pulled out a black flint arrowhead, beautifully shaped, smooth as river stone. He extended it to her. If danger returns, he said, place this on the flat rock on the hill to the west, the one shaped like a sleeping coyote. We watch that hill. Cora stared at the arrowhead, her chest tightening. A gift like this was more than a token. It was a promise, a bond. She took it gently. I hope I never need to use it. So do I, he said softly. His horse turned to join the others. He stopped once more and added, You are not alone anymore, Cora Thompson. Chief Nuna raised his hand in a brief gesture of respect before leading the riders west. The Comanche war party swept across the plains just as they had come, swift, sure, unbroken. Their silhouettes shrank into the horizon until they became nothing but specks against the fading sun. Then the only sounds left were the crackling of the dying fire and Cora's soft, unsteady breath. She stood on her porch, the arrowhead clutched in her hand, staring at the empty land where they had disappeared. Her barn was gone. Her well was ruined. Her home was scarred. But she was alive, because 3 days earlier she had refused to let a man die in a trap, and now an entire tribe had stood with her. That moment settled deep in her heart, warmer than any Texas sun. As the sky shifted into dusk, painting the world in shades of gold and violet, Cora closed her eyes and let the wind carry the memory of the war cries. She was still alone on the map, but she was no longer alone in the world. For the rest of her life, she would remember that third day, the day when enemies became protectors, the day when honor crossed the invisible lines between worlds, the day when mercy came back to her strong and fierce as a rising storm. And somewhere far to the west, a warrior named Tohopka would remember too, the woman who freed him from iron jaws and stood her ground with the soul of a fighter. A woman who changed his fate. A woman worth riding for.